Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ask Me Anything About Employment with Debbie Nicolellis. My name is David Blair, and I'll be your moderator today. This webinar is not a presentation, but an interactive question and answer period. For the next hour, Debbie will take any questions you have related to engaging people with psychiatric disabilities in employment and vocational recovery. Debbie has 30 years of experience with training, consultation, program management, and service provision in supporting employment, career exploration, psychiatric rehabilitation, and recovery-oriented systems and service. Debbie currently serves as project director and lead trainer for the Advanced Practitioner and Peer Support Training Project in engaging people with psychiatric disabilities in employment and vocational recovery at the Boston University Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation, which teaches vocational rehabilitation, mental health, and peer support personnel about concepts and skills related to engaging adults in meaningful and vocational activity. Debbie has authored curricula, journal, and newsletter articles, and a book chapter on psychiatric rehabilitation and related topic areas, and is an experienced trainer and speaker. That's quite a mouthful. Today's event is jointly funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, and the Center for Mental Health Services within the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The content of this webinar does not represent the views or policies of the funding agencies, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. During registration for the event, you were given the opportunity to submit any questions in advance. Over the course of the webinar, we will alternate between questions submitted in advance and the ones you have today. You may ask questions now by typing them into the chat box or letting me know you would like to ask it by phone. Well, welcome to the webinar, and I hope you enjoy the next hour. And welcome, Debbie. I know you had a little introduction you wanted to share with us, so why don't you go ahead and do that now?
Sure. Well, I'll just add to the very kind introduction that you gave, David, that the webinar that we have today is in essence based on a course that we are offering right now as a part of our grant from SAMHSA and NIDLR to improve outcomes, employment outcomes for people with psychiatric. And so this presentation today, or this Ask Me Anything, is really intended to be focused on how to engage people with psychiatric in employment and vocational recovery. So the focus may be mostly on engagement strategies. How do we engage people in employment? What does vocational recovery look like? How do we support people around their motivation for employment and vocational recovery? How do we help people make choices about employment so that they can better engage in the employment support process, employment itself, vocational recovery for the. So that's what I'll add. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you all. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for spending your time with us and me and the questions I'll have and
Sure.
the questions everyone has brought with us. We're going to start with something really broad and I think poignant is, what is vocational recovery? And in general, how do I engage people in?
Right. It's a big question, isn't it? So what is vocational recovery? Vocational recovery is a newer term. A lot of people say, I haven't really heard that term. But when we talk about vocational recovery, we're not just talking about getting a job. A lot of the focus on employment services is very justifiably getting people into a job. When we talk about vocational recovery, we're talking about more than the job or a job. We're really talking about a trajectory, path, a lifetime of vocational experiences and a lifetime of kind of honing who I am as a worker and as a productive citizen in the world. So vocational recovery probably has a variety of definitions, and we all might come up with our own. But I really think about it as, a lifetime of exploring and identifying and living out a life of meaningful vocational activity. So with that pretty broad definition, I think you asked, David, how do we engage people in that? And I think one of the first things that we need to recognize is that people with psychiatric disabilities, people in mental health recovery, people with psychiatric or mental health challenges can and do work. That possibility for a meaningful vocational life is real, is possible, and that all people can have a life of meaningful, activity or experience. So there are many pieces to involving people in that, but I think it really starts with believing that people can, and that even believing that people with some serious challenges and people who really struggle with the idea of work or struggle with symptoms and struggle with other, life challenges can work. That we're probably not, as a field, talking about employment enough. And that's why I'm so delighted to see so many people with us today, because we're probably not talking about employment enough in our services, in our supports, in our peer support, in our mental health treatment supports, and hopefully in our employment and vocational rehabilitation supports. But that idea that we really, we start with a belief that people can work and that it is possible to engage people in a lifetime of meaningful work.
You mentioned your course, and Amy in the room just asked a question kind of tangentially related, so it's a chance to talk about that too. But she asked, what courses or workshops do you recommend for supported employment specialists to take to increase our success with clients for vocational work?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, and I'm sure there are many. So I can't speak to them all, but I can speak to some of the ones that I know about that we offer. I'll point people to some of the ones that we have going on now. If anybody is interested in learning more about engaging people in employment, and if you're interested in this particular course, the APPS course, APPS stands for Advanced Practitioner and Peer Support Skills in engaging people with psychiatric disabilities in employment and vocational recovery. We are offering that course on a somewhat limited basis right now through the grant that we have for free. And so if you're interested in that course, email me. For this year, we'll be able to offer it for free. So we'd be happy to involve you in that course if you're interested in it. Our website, which David can post in a little bit in the chat box, also offers some courses in psychiatric rehabilitation, in engaging people in different ways. The other piece that we have is some products, and I don't mean this to be a sales pitch, but I'm thinking about courses that I know of offhand that can support you in your work in engaging people in employment. There are some products that we offer that are relatively cheap, that are downloads that may be helpful. The self-directed psychiatric rehabilitation tools could be helpful. There's some pieces in there that are really meant to do by the person. They're meant to be, it's like a workbook for the person, but that can be done with a support person, a supported employment specialist or a peer specialist. A family member can do it with the person and really think through, where am I in my motivation for thinking about work, and how do I make a choice about what I want to do in the whole world of work out there? How do I know what direction to go in, and how do I figure out what skills and support and things like that. So there are some products that we have on our site, and I'll ask David to post the site, and we can also post my email address. I'll do that noweu.edu is my email address. You can email me if you're interested in the course that we're offering. I think there's a couple of people who are attending today who just took that course, so we're happy to have you. And there are certainly other classes out there to support you, but those are some that I know that we offer, and we try to keep things really low cost or free if we can offer. Thank you, David. I can see that you put our website on there. Great.
Yeah, and I should mention, I'm pretty sure your course is free, at least
it
for right
is.
now.
Right now it's free. That's right.
Okay. Carla asks, what is the first step? And I'm guessing it's in engage around employment. So what's the first step?
In engaging people. Well, I would say the first step, beyond believing that, is to develop a real partnership with people. So one of the first things that I know we teach in our class is how do we develop a real partnership with people. Part of that is really thinking through and learning with the person about what they're interested in, who they are as a person, and really honing our listening skills and our, partnership skills to be able to pay attention to what the person brings into the process. A lot of times we have a process in mind, and we bring our paper or our book or our workbook, and we have a process that we intend to lead the person through. But that process can be hollow if the person is not fully in there with us. So the very first thing that I would recommend doing is developing a real partnership with the person, no matter what your role is. And sometimes that's hard to do. You only have a certain amount of time with people. But it's really key to, involve the person as fully as you can in the process, that they are taking ownership in the process, and that you're not, pulling the person along. I hear that even in our last class, people were saying, I think if I find that I'm doing all of the work that, things aren't going so well. And I would say that's true. We want to engage people in ways that they want to be engaged in the vocational process and involve them as full partners in this process. So, that can mean really finding out what parts of the process they already know about, what have they done, what are they good at, what are they not good at, what do they not know, and varying the process that we involve people in depending on where they are, which sounds pretty simple and organic, but it takes a lot of work, as you know. So if you've been doing this work, you know that can take some time, that can take some effort, really on both sides. But what that can do is to, have a participant who's raring to go, who's interested in and who knows about the process enough to be able to participate in it. And I'll add that in order for the person to know about the process, we have to also introduce people to the process, teach people about it, teach people about what's coming up, teach people how to participate in the process. So engaging people in employment and vocational recovery is in part sharing the process with the people that we serve so that they can participate in it, and so that they can not only participate in it once, but have this as their own process. I was talking with a friend of mine who has been through a process like this about, what was the process like for her back in the day, and she's now, a researcher and working very successfully. And she has said, it's really learning how to determine for myself how to assess each experience, whether it was successful or not. And she'll be the first person to say, I was fired, I was let go, I didn't always want the experience that I had, so I'd leave. There are a lot of experiences that she had. She said, I learned how to assess each of those experiences for myself and start to determine what worked for me, what doesn't, what do I like, what do I not like, so that I could make better and better employment decisions. And now she's been a worker for a long time, highly successful, and really looks back on that process of being involved in a really key way as the basis of her success now, or at least one of the bases of that. So that's
During
what I would say.
your talk there, yeah, during your answer
Yeah.
there, you mentioned a number of times about varying the process. And so what I'm gathering is you have a plan, but if what you're presented with doesn't fit that mold, that step-by-step thing, and sometimes you just have to abandon the plan and respond to that moment. Is that the right idea, or am I off base?
Absolutely. Absolutely. People come into the process in different places. Not everybody comes in not having had employment experience or not knowing anything about, the vocational support process. Some people have a lot of experience with that. Some people were very successful workers at some point and now want very specific parts. My best example of this for myself, and anybody who's in the course probably heard this example, is a guy who came into our services at some point, and he said, I'd like to learn how to get a job. And I said, well, great, we have all of these services that we can offer you. We can help you determine your readiness for a job, and we can help you choose the kind of job you want. We can help you keep the job. And he'd say, well, I'm really just looking to learn how to get a job. And I was like, okay, so you really know what you want, and we can help you choose which job that is. And I had a process in mind that I was going to offer this guy. And he must have said about 7 times, I really just want to learn how to get a job. And when I finally listened and said, so you want to learn how to get a job, I was finally able to not only, knock on myself and say, listen, Debbie, listen, but really tailor that process and teach him and learn myself in some ways all of the different skills that he needed in order to get a job. And then when we did that and really tailored that process to suit exactly where he was, he went out and got a job. And when he told me about it, I said, oh, that's great. If you want help keeping the job, we can help you do that too. And he said, no, thank you very much. This has been great. I'm going to go to work now. So we really have to tailor it to the person, where they are, what they want, what they're good at, and what support they want us to offer.
And I'm going to skip around with people's questions because it's related to this process you're talking about right now. Someone asked in the room, how do you suggest explaining the process to those individuals who may have a dual diagnosis of intellectual and developmental disabilities and a mental health diagnosis?
Yeah, and this question comes up a lot. Everybody has a different challenge. Everybody has different cognitive abilities, different people. We at BU tend to be kind of wordy, and so we have, a lot of workbooks and books and things like this. We're university folk. But nothing in the vocational rehabilitation process, the employment support process, even our wordy books and such, cannot be tailored to the person. And I think the real challenge, and there's no one answer for this, so I recognize that the person who's asking this question probably has a particular person in mind, and there's never really one answer for it, but feel free to take those materials, take the process, and make it available to the person. So if that means engaging the person with pictures, then engage them with pictures. If it's more about action and doing, then tailor it with more activity. If it's showing the person and then supporting them to do it, then use that method. You can always tailor it to sort of help the person understand, and that's, I guess, the real key is whatever we have to do to help the person to understand and be as much of a part of the process as possible. One of the things that comes to mind is, organizations that have oriented people with developmental disabilities, for example, who were part of committees and such, by color coding the materials that they would hand out and go over as part of their committee work, so that the person who had a developmental disability could catch up with the piece of paper that they were working on by knowing that everybody's working right now, and be able to easily maneuver through colors, through supports. It can be even helping people with prompts. So whatever people need in order to feel a part of the process and to be a part of the process.
Thank you. I may skip back to some of these questions that were submitted in advance just to give people who took the time to type it before a fair chance at asking, but I'm not forgetting about those in the room. I will be asking back and forth. Kristen, who's a vocational specialist, asks, how do I support someone who is sometimes motivated to work and then when a work opportunity becomes available, says he doesn't want to work?
Right. Yeah. So I bet that's a familiar one for a lot of folks. I think I've done that a time or two too. Making a change like work is scary. When we're talking about employment, we're talking about making a change can be challenging in all of the ways that making a change can be challenging. It can require resources. It can require skills that we may or may not be sure that we have. It can be nerve-wracking. It can challenge us on every level. And I think, the people we serve also have those challenges, right? And they may have them at levels that we're not dealing with them. The question is, how do I help people with motivation? And one of the things that I think about a lot is that, it's hard to motivate people. I try to take that out of the the equation. But it is possible to help people to assess their own or explore their own motivation. We call this different things depending on what piece of material you're looking at. Sometimes we call this assessing readiness. Sometimes we call this exploring motivational foundations or exploring motivation or engaging motivation. But what it comes down to is exploring with the person, to what extent do I have a need to make it now, given my satisfaction or the lack thereof with my current situation. So one of the things that could be happening for that person is that they may be feeling pressure from one place or another to make a change in their work status, but may actually feel pretty satisfied with not working. So that could be one piece that we're not aware of. I know I've run into that in my work. And have experienced that myself. Not so sure I want to make that change because I'm actually happy with the way things are now. Another piece can be the beliefs that somebody has. So do I believe that I can make something like this happen? Do I believe that I have what it takes to make this happen? Is this really a change that I want? Do I think I want that? Do I believe that I have enough support and the kinds of support that I need in order to make a change like this happen? Things like that can make a difference too. So if we haven't explored these questions, those might be kind of going behind the scenes and may stop the person from actually showing up at that interview or continuing to work with you. Other things that can come up are things like, do I know enough to really start thinking about this stuff? And do I know enough to start this process with you? Do I know enough about the world of work? Do I know enough about myself as a worker? Like, do I feel knowledgeable enough to even enter this process? Can be another. So these kinds of things can be really key kind of question marks. I often think about it as if we can unearth some of the question marks that a person has, the person might even have questions about, if I get a job, what's going to happen to my Social Security, and am I going to lose my health insurance? And, I've been told that, blah, blah, blah. I've been told that I'll never get back on. I've been told that I get cut off immediately, whatever. And so if we can start to unearth the questions, whether they're kind of deep, do I need this, or deep, will I lose my Social Security kinds of questions, we can then start to help the person to answer and help them to feel like they're on more solid ground. Because if the person is feeling like they're on, sandy ground or shaking ground, they're less likely to take the leap and continue with the process. So we recommend really exploring the motivational foundations that a person might be considering in the background that we might not even know, and then helping the person to develop those, beliefs, the knowledge, that support, and even the need. If the person would find it helpful, for example, to be introduced to possibilities so that they can really see a possibility for themselves, they can see a future for themselves, and start to be introduced to the possibilities are some of the ways that we can address some of those questions. Another way to address them is if the person has questions about what happens to my benefits, is getting them to benefits counseling. So that is my recommendation. And if you want more information on that process, there's a couple of places on our website where you can, get books on that, workbooks on that, and even our course that I mentioned before addresses this piece as one of the modules. So this is an interesting piece that we have to offer. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. And so there are questions here. I'm going to try to ask them with this engaging in employment bend as best I can. The first one is Natalie, and she asks, is there any vocational assessments or vocational exploration exercises that you can recommend for this population, or any particular handouts that you can think of? I think she's looking for ways to help guide people, things she can give them. And if I'm overstepping, Natalie, please let me know. I'm just trying to make it generic enough that Debbie can answer.
And you said vocational exploration, David?
Yes.
Okay. So that sounds to me like, how do we help people to make a choice? And there are, the simple question of, are there handouts? Are there worksheets? Yes, there are a couple. Those self-directed psych rehab activities is one that's out there on our website again. That's a possibility. That has worksheets. It's all worksheets. It's really meant for the person to kind of work through through the process themselves. But a simple way that you can just use a piece of scratch paper is to think about the kinds of experiences that the person has had. So to have a conversation with the person about what are their past experiences. And I think this was one of the more powerful pieces that people who got to Module 4 in our course really experience, is having a conversation with people about their previous experiences, and not just what have you done before, but really looking into depth around, what did you like about that experience? What did you not like? What were you good at? What were you not so good at? And have people even write something about it. We sometimes call that a vita, or, the resume that you'll never hand an employer. But it's really just a sense of, what kinds of tasks did you do? What kinds of things did you do? And what was the environment like? What were the people like? And what kinds of things did you like, not like, or good at, not so good at? And start to translate those experiences and those likes and dislikes into preferences for the future. So I think this is one of the more powerful things that psychiatric rehabilitation has to offer the field of employment, is helping people to make a choice about what they want to do. It's one of the things that kind of turns more traditional vocational rehabilitation on its head a little bit, in that we used to sort of say, so what can you do, and let's place you there. And in psychiatric rehabilitation, we say, where do you want to go, and how can we help you get there? And it's a very different thing. And I think it's important for people who have traditionally been, left out of decision-making or had choices taken away for a variety of different reasons, who have just not had the opportunity sometimes to be participants in choices like this, to be able to say, in essence, what would you like? But not just asking that question. That's too big of a question. It's almost like taking, somebody who's never been to this country to the cereal aisle in your local grocery store and saying, which cereal would you like? It's too big a question. There's too many, and the person may not know enough to know which one is which. So the question is really, given what you've done in the past, even if you've had very little employment experience, you know, it could be experience in school, it could be experience with volunteering, it could be taking care of a sick family member, it could be military experience. Given the experiences that you have, what have you learned about yourself and the world of work, and what does that mean for you as you think about moving forward? What kinds of things would you like to see again? What would you like to do again? What kind of people would you like to work with? And what kinds of things would you not like to see again? And how can we translate that into something that you're looking for? So that's a really simple thing you can do on scrap paper, but kind of help people to be a participant in a choice like that. And David, before you ask me the next question, I'll say that I know I've had people say to me after participating in a process like that, say, do you mean that I have a choice about the jobs that I get? You know, that basically I don't just have to take whatever job people have for me. Yes, you also are a decision maker here. That's the key.
So a lot of what I'm hearing you say is it's about more than any worksheet, it's getting people to think about what they want, to talk about what, and then you as the specialist to really listen, respond, and help them look for that. And by doing that, by engaging them in that process, you can help people become interested in working and, you know, really seek it out instead of just along for the ride.
Right. And that's not to say that, you know, everybody's, you know, all of their preferences are going to be found in the perfect job everywhere. That's not the idea. But the idea is to really listen for what the person is looking for. And then, you know, the next obvious step is to take a look at what is out there. If the person's looking for a job, what jobs are out there in your neighborhood? If the person is looking for a training program, you know, what training programs address that? It could be the person's just thinking about what field they might go in and then into, and then therefore, what do I need to do next? But to look at some of the realities, right? What's out there, and see which one is the best match. You know, the most important piece I would say is that preference piece, because once you have that, you can take a look at what's out there, evaluate those according to the person's preferences, and then support the person to make the best choice for them. And it's often, you know, an involved process. It can be a difficult process. It can be a process that takes a little time because you're researching the possibilities. But it also can be very rewarding and, again, involves the person from the get-go in figuring out what makes sense for them. And you're right, David. By doing that, we have buy-in from the person. It's hopefully going to be a better match because it's really associated with what the person is looking for. It's sort of like what we do all the time. It's sharing that process of, you know, if you're looking for a new house or a new apartment, you know, you think about how much light you want, what kind of kitchen you want, how many bedrooms you want, whatever it is. We think about, given my past experience with this, what do I want now? And who has the closest to my perfect vision? And is that enough? Do I want that thing?
Sure. You know, and you talked a lot here about finding what the person wants. And Evan in the room asks, I've met a number of people who had professional level jobs, but have been out of work for a while. They find when they try to reenter the workforce, they have trouble finding services that'll help them get back to the level of employment they had previously. Services tend to provide help for getting entry-level positions, but not above that. Can you tell me if there are any services for Evan in the Boston area that help people recover, secure more advanced levels of employment? And I guess more generally as well, not just Boston, but, you know, for everyone else listening from North Carolina or, you know, California.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great question. You know, one of the things that we tend to think about is that people traditionally have been placed in, you know, what's become known as the 5 or 6 or 7 F's. So food jobs, quote unquote, filth jobs, right? You know, cleaning and stuff, flowers, folding, filing. There's a bunch of F's out there. And, you know, that really, there's a lot of jobs in there that really work for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everyone. And so if somebody was an accountant before, or a researcher, or a business owner, what makes sense for me now is the great question. And I think that's true. A lot of programs sort of say, well, we have, and I'm not trying to put down any particular program, but here are the jobs that we have. Which one would you like? And that comes out of, working with employers and trying to find employers who will hire some of the people that they serve. But you're right, Evan, that it's not tailoring the process to the people who are walking through the door, and you're really looking. There probably are services in Boston. There probably are some services across the country that do that, and I think, I'll put out a call to everyone. Really pay attention when people are coming in with a lot of experience. We have to really think about, so how do we help this person rejoin the workforce? And it is a little bit hard to find, but how do we help this person to rejoin the workforce? I know, we taught this process in a class with folks who were thinking about work, and one of the people was somebody who had a very high up job in a publishing company as the last job that they had, and was really discouraged about, what the possibilities were, and, I'll never work again. It's just a huge cloud hanging over this person's head. And through going through this process, through really just thinking through what are my preferences, given my experiences, even just exploring what was the good, the bad, and the ugly of my last experiences, was actually really helpful, because then this person realized that not every piece of that experience was bad. That there were some things that they really loved, and actually figured out a whole new career, and took that into a new career, got some training, started working. I don't know what they're doing now, but really took that and translated their experience into, I'm not trying to get back to where I was, but given all of that, and the truth is I kind of hated it, what do I want to do now? And really thinking about career development for people with a high level of experience.
And drawing upon one of our previous sessions with Len Statham, he said as the vocational specialists try to build their network, it is the smaller employers, not your big name employers, but the smaller employers who are more likely or more willing to take a risk. And so as a vocational specialist, build that network with those small employers in your town, and maybe opportunities for them will present themselves instead of a large corporation.
Yeah, right. I love it.
So,
and, I want to mention too, David, that I think we have some of those previous AMAs, they Ask Me Anythings, archived. Is that true? Can people access those if they're interested in hearing more from Len or from any of our previous speakers?
Yeah, actually they're all online. I'll post a link for everyone in a second. And the transcripts of them are up too, so you don't have to listen to the whole thing. You can read or search for what you want in it. So while I paste that, I'll ask the next question from Scott. And he says, how important is focusing on one's education level? Many positions we see in New York City mandate a high school diploma or a GED. How would one address both the educational aspects and developing skills set to obtain employment? So really, as you engage them, the fears they face of, I'm not qualified for anything. So how does one engage that and get around these education requirements?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? And a lot of employers now have a lot of weeding out tools that they're using to, everything from software to HR itself, just weeding out anybody who doesn't match those criteria. So I have a couple of thoughts on that. One is that, kind of riffing off what Len Statham said about the smaller employers, one of the things that we can do if a person, does not have the educational requirements to meet a lot of the jobs that they're interested in, is to start to partner with employers who are, interested in quality help, who may or may not have that background. There have been a lot of people in the world who are very, very bright and very good workers who didn't have the educational qualification that one might think they needed to have, or something like that. So working with employers who are interested and who have a need, finding out what employers actually need, not only looking at the job descriptions that are out there, but maybe even talking with employers about what kinds of jobs are unfilled, what kinds of things are stretching their employees so much that they can't get other work done, that maybe they can carve out a piece of a job that somebody could do who doesn't need a GED for. Those kinds of things can be really helpful to people, to help employers identify the kinds of jobs that they have that they could hire people for without that kind of educational requirement. The other plug I'm going to give is for education. So if we can help people to get that education, if they're interested in it, boy, that takes people places. The higher the education people have, the better they often do, both financially and in terms of a career. So I'd really recommend finding the programs in your community that help people get their GED, that help people to get basic education, that help people, get higher education, because that can often take them places. So that might be another thing to either add into the pile or to help people to think about, consider getting that education so that they can get the kinds of employment that they want. So two-sided piece there.
Would you say, with respect to education, that in this conversation about engaging people in employment, that they do education first and then work on jobs, or is it one of those, co-occurring things, like you're working on getting a job and at the same time you're improving your skills? Is it too much? Right. Is it the right choice?
It's really going to depend on the person, isn't it? Some people are going to want to get that GED first before they can even consider a job. Other people need a job now. They need the money. They need to be productive. They need to be doing something. And I say need because either they feel like they need it, or they may have an external force that's kind of pushing them into work, or both. Some people might want to do both, do some part-time work and take a class at a time kind of thing. Everybody's different. Everybody has different capacities. Everybody has different desire for and sort of room for the amount of stuff that they want to take on. For different people experience work and school differently, so the challenges may vary. Some people may think that school is too big a thing to take on right now, and other folks may think that work is too big a thing to take on. Some people will be excited to do both. So I would pay attention to what the person gets really excited about, what they want to do first. It's sometimes hard to tease out, but to start to explore the possibilities, looking at the very real situations that people are in, and helping them to make the best decision that they can make at that.
And I'm going back to one of these things from before. You've mentioned a lot about things where people seem to show an interest and have a direction, but and the question is, what do I do with people who don't seem to have a particular employment goal or a particular direction that they're going? I think there are people who might end up in this process simply because someone suggested it and they didn't say no. Right. What brings you here? My case manager told me to come. Yes.
That just happens a lot, right? Or my mom suggested it, or I don't know, I thought I'd see what you do. So if the person doesn't know, again, I would start with the motivation question. And that's not to say, are you motivated? That's not the question. But the question is to see with the person, where is your motivation? Do you feel a need to make a change now? Is this something, is making a vocational change something that you want? Does it have, do you think it has enough benefit for you that it outweighs any risk that it carries, or do the risks really outweigh the benefits? Do you believe you have support for this? Is this something you know a lot about? Really start to explore some of those motivational factors and help the person to really develop any that are tricky for the person. And then helping people to make informed vocational choices I think can be a really beautiful thing. Sometimes people need experience in in work in order to even start to be able to think about making a choice. They may not have any experience with work at all. So one of the things that we can do to kind of develop motivation for work is to help people to experience, which sounds a little bit backwards, right? But the reality is that if a person doesn't have a lot of experience with work, we can help people to have a series of experiences with work. My old mentor used to call it a series of successful experiences, which is a whole lot of S sounds. But it's a good point, helping people to try out work, see what they liked, see what they were good at, and then keep trying out different pieces to start to really hone a vocational identity for themselves, hone their knowledge of the world of work, and to start to really decide for themselves, is this something that I want in my life? And if so, what would that look like?
Going to the next question we have on the list, and I think this is one we get a lot, it's around disclosure. Lauren asks, about returning for work for a person with a psychiatric disability, do you disclose diagnosis upon the return to work or not? What are the kind of pros and cons of this, and what's your approach, and what do you recommend in your opinion? And before you answer that, I'll give the general answer that I've heard time and time again, is that it is up to the individual to decide if they want to disclose or not. They do not have to disclose, but if they want protections and accommodations that the law provides for them, they have to disclose, and quite honestly, they have to disclose before they need the accommodation. And they should do it in writing. Even if they present it to their boss in person, they should follow it up in writing. That way there's a documented trail. So kind of with that groundwork laid for you, what's your approach to disclosure?
Yeah, I agree with the personal decision piece, and there's a lot to the decision about whether or not to disclose, when to disclose, who to disclose to, where to disclose, under what circumstances to disclose. I can say that when not to disclose is probably the day that you're getting fired. You can't fire me, I have a disability. It's not going to work. It doesn't, at least you don't have protection under the law for that. But if you're looking for more information about, the ins and outs of disclosure, the ins and outs of accommodation, you might even be wondering what the heck is an accommodation, or what's one, for people with psychiatric disabilities. I really recommend two things. One is askjan.org, and David, if you could write that in there, askjan.org is a website for the Job Accommodation Network. They are the resource for disclosure and accommodations and, Americans with Disability Act information in this country. They are tremendous. And they have a whole section on psychiatric disabilities. You can look up accommodations by, like diagnosis or kind of disability. So they have tremendous resources in there. They have forms that you can use to give an employer if the employer doesn't have one already. They have information about how one can disclose. You can just tell an employer in real English what you need. So there's a lot more information that they have. And I believe, David, since you've been the host of all of these, that the head of the Job Accommodation Network did one of these some months ago. Do I remember that right?
Yeah, I think it was Job Accommodation Network. Lou Orslin did it, but I forget what his job is.
Yes.
Oh, he's the co-director of GAN. He is the co-director of GAN.
Yeah, so he did one, and we have that archived. So you can also hear, Lou talk about these issues, on an AMA just like this, and then go to the website for a lot more information. So I'll not try to be your, your key informant about that, but allow Jan to do that. They're really a wonderful resource.
Okay, sure, and just kind of following up, Evan just wrote in the room, it is my understanding that there is no legal requirement to disclose prior to requesting an accommodation, although it's a good idea. I'll also add, we're not lawyers, but we just have the experience of having seen these questions a bunch of times. So, you know, these are the general guidelines. The Ask Jan is the type place to go for, you know, the exact legal question and how to approach it.
Yeah, ask.org.
Yeah, and the links in the room. And Carla asked, this is a while ago, what about individuals with criminal background barriers to employment? And this was, I believe, related to, you know, people who don't have the academic qualifications. I just wanted to say, because I know we're running out of time here, that there's an entire Ask Me Anything about hiring, recruiting peers with Laverne Miller. And in that she really gets into people with criminal backgrounds, forensic backgrounds, and how to approach it. But it's really just the summary of what happened is it's believing that you can work, that you can make meaningful contributions, and owning and accepting what your background is, but not letting that determine what you're. I think that's the summary of the advice she had to give. And, you know, that approach you can just take forward. So I'm not the expert here today, but a lot of questions outside the scope that I wanted to make sure we at least get answers for people.
And I recommend, you know, pulling up that archived AMA. It's just an hour, and she's a really great resource, and I listened to that one. It was wonderful, so I recommend it.
So next question is, how do I support people who seem to be unmotivated for it?
Well, this might be a good way to wrap this session up. You know, I'll say that what looks sometimes like a lack of motivation could be a lot of things. It could be resignation to my fate, so to speak. You know, that feeling of, well, if this is as good as it gets, well, then I guess I'll just stay here. It may be that we as a system have done such a quote-unquote good job at teaching people how to be quote-unquote good patients that people might not be kind of pushing against the status quo and saying, I want to work and you need to help me figure that out. And it may be that people are, you know, change is a huge thing, and that just saying, would you like to go to work, maybe, I don't know what happened there with the light, but maybe kind of a scary question, and to help people to break that down into sort of bite-sized pieces and explore, you know, that motivational foundations kind of piece, that readiness piece. You know, do I have a need for this? Do I want it? Do I believe in it? You know, all of these pieces can really help people to decide for themselves. And I'll say lastly, share the process with people so that they understand what it is that you're interested in doing with them and that they can take it on and learn it for themselves. I think that will get us beyond the this person isn't motivated kind of question. The person may have motivations we don't know about.
Sure. Well, Debbie, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to answer everyone's questions today. I know we didn't get to everyone, and if there is some burning question you have, please email scirehab@bu.edu, and we'll pass that message along to someone who will try to help you out or point you to someone who can answer your question. Thank you again, and we look forward to having you join us in the future.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.